Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Yeah, so we are going to see the uh, what is the .NET Core interview question. So let's pull it up. The .NET Core interview questions. Let's see where it is. Migrations. Okay. .NET Core project. So can you explain the architecture of the your project? In my project, we followed the layer entire architecture. On front end, we use the Angular 17. On back end, we use the multiple layers like API layer and business logic layer and data access layer. So we had an API layer in the web API project. So containing the controllers that expose the REST endpoints and controllers only handled HTTP request and didn't have business logic. And the API layer has custom middlewares and DTOs, and the controllers pass the data into the business logic layer, and the business logic layer contains the services that implemented the application rules and business operations. So the data access layer was built using the entity framework core. We had a repositories like repository pattern repository, patient repository and doctor repository that interacted with the SQL server database via DB context. And okay. So we also had a common layer where we kept the shared entities and the DTOs and enums. DTOs. Okay. So we wrote unit test cases and shared for mocking the repositories, and on the test web API. So it is looks like business logic layer and okay. A business logic layer, we place the rules inside the service methods. For example, when scheduling an appointment, the service first checks the doctor exist and availability by querying the repositories. If doctor is free, the service creates an appointment and any related updates inside the database transactions. Okay. So what is the RESTful API? So REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and RESTful APIs follows a few key principles. REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and RESTful APIs follows a few key principles. They they uses the client server model architecture. They uses the client server model architecture. Client server model architecture, where front end and back end are separate, and they uses the uniform interface. They uses the uniform interface, meaning every resource has a unique URL, we and we use the standard HTTP methods to get to read and post to create and put to update and delete to remove. They use uniform resource, and they are stateless. Each request carries all the information. The server does not remember anything about the client state. So they are stateless. Each request carries all the information. The server does not remember anything about the client state. They are cacheable. Responses can be cached, and which helps to improve the performance and reduce the server load. They are cacheable. Responses can be cached, and which helps to improve the performance and reduce the server load. They support layered system. They support layered system. Request may pass through the load balancers or gateways. They support a layered system. Request may pass through load balancers or gateways. They support layered systems. Request may pass through load balancers or gateways, and optionally, they allow the code on demand. They allow code on demand. This rarely used in practice. They allows code on demand. This is rarely used in practice. What is the solid principles? Solid principle is a set of five principles. Solid principle is a set of five principles for writing clean, maintainable, and scalable object-oriented code. And S for single responsibility. S for single responsibility principle. S for single responsibility. S for single responsibility. Each class should focus on single functionality, making it easier to maintain. Each class should focus on a single functionality. Each class should focus on single functionality, making it easier to maintain. And single responsibility and open closed principle. Open closed principle. O stands for open closed principle. And you should be able to add new features without changing the existing code. You should be able to add new features without changing the existing code. Open closed principle is you should be able to add new features without changing the existing code. And Lisco substitution. Lisco substitution means Lisco substitution. Lisco substitution. Imagine we have a base class called patient. Imagine we have a base class called patient. Imagine we have a base class called patient with a method get medical record. We can have child classes like inpatient and outpatient. Lisco substitution says that whenever we use a patient object, we should be able to use inpatient and outpatient without breaking the code. Imagine you have a base class. Imagine you have a base class called patient with the method get medical records. We can have children classes like inpatient and outpatient. Lisco substitution principle says that whenever we use a patient object, we should able to use inpatient and outpatient without breaking the code. Imagine you have a base class called patient with the method get medical record. We can have child classes like inpatient and outpatient. So Lisco substitution principle says that whenever we use a patient object, we should be able to use inpatient and outpatient without breaking the code. And um, interface segregation principle. I stands for interface segregation principle. I stands for interface segregation principle. Don't force a class to implement methods it does not need. For example, instead of one big iMachine interface, we create iPrinter and iScanner separately. Break the large interfaces into smaller and specific ones so classes only implement what they need. So interface segregation means don't force a class to implement a method it does not need. For example, instead of a one big iMachine interface, we create iPrinter or iScanner separately. Uh, this breaks the large interfaces into the smaller and specific ones, so classes only implement what they needed. And dependency inversion principle. Dependency inversion principle: high level modules should not depend on a low level modules. High level modules should not depend on the low level modules. High level modules should not depend on the low level modules. Both should depend on the abstraction. Both should depend on the abstractions. Always depend on the interfaces or abstractions, not concrete implementation to reduce the coupling, tight coupling. Yeah. So what is the solid principles? So S stands for single responsibility, O stands for open closed, and L stands for Risco substitution, and I stands for interface segregation, and transfer uh, dependency inversion. So single responsibility, open closed, Risco substitution, interface segregation, and dependency inversion. Okay. What are the HTTP method commonly used in a REST API? So get, post, put, patch, and delete. Get is used to fetch the data, and post is used to create a new resources, and put is used to fully update an existing resource, and patch is used for partial updates. Delete is used to remove the remove a resource. Get is to fetch the data, and put is used to create a new resource, and put is used to fully update an existing resource, and patch is used for partial updates, and delete is used to remove a resource. Difference between put and patch: the put replaces the entire resource with the new data, and patch updates only the part of the resource, only the field you send or changes. So difference between put and patch is, okay, post and put. Post is used to create a difference between the post and put. So post is used to create a new resource, and the put sends the data to updated an existing resource at specific URL. Okay, post is used to create a new resource, and put is sends a data to update an existing resource at a specific URL. How you improve the API performance? To improve the API performance, implement the caching, and always prefer to use asynchronous methods, and implement the server-side pagination, and optimize queries with the projections by selecting only required columns and fields, and use as no tracking for read-only queries, and avoid n plus one query problems, and use raw SQL or store procedures for complex queries, and batch multiple operations. Use batching for bulk inserts and updates and deletes imports. Oh, and See, and for frequently accessed data, to improve the API performance for frequently accessed data, implement the caching to reduce the unnecessary database calls. With caching, a client or user will not query the database directly instead requested to the cache first, then checks the cache. If the data is not available, then it queries to the database, and stores the results in a cache with an expiry, and from the cache it will returns back the client or user. Always prefer to use a synchronous method. With async and await keyword, the server does not block the threads while waiting for the input-output operations. Server does not block the threads while waiting for the input-output operations like database calls, and this means your API can handle more requests at the same time. This means your API can handle some more requests at the same time. Implement the server-side pagination to avoid returning the huge result sets. For example, I have millions of records in patient table. So in a single query, it is not possible to fetch the entire data. So use the pagination to retrieve the data in a smaller chunks, and optimize queries with the projection by selecting the only the required columns and fields. Use the select at entity framework core query level projection into the DT posts, and use as no tracking. Use as no use as no tracking, and you in an entity framework core tracks every by default entity framework core tracks every entity it retrieves in a DB context change tracker. So read-only queries like get APIs, like get APIs tracking is unnecessary. In this case, prefer to use as no tracking to skip the change tracking. Avoid n plus one problem, which cause the excessive database calls, and slow performance, which will cause excessive database calls, which slow the performance, and use raw SQL and store procedure for complex queries, and bulk batch multiple operations, use batching for bulk insert and updates. And how will you improve the EF core performance? Use ASNO tracking for read-only queries. EF core does not track changes, and always project only the field you need instead of loading the full entities. And add paging with the skip and take to avoid returning huge datasets, and avoid the n plus 1 problem by using the include or projection properties properly. And optimize database queries with the indexes, and sometimes raw SQL queries for complex cases. .NET Core. What is the course? How will you enable the course? Course is a cross resource sharing is a security feature implemented by browsers that restrict the web pages from calling APIs hosted on a different domain, and port or protocol unless the server explicitly allows it. Cross-origin resource sharing is a security feature implemented by browsers that restricts web pages from calling APIs hosted on a different domain or port. For example, Angular app runs on the local host, and your API runs on the local host of 5001. For example, your application is runs on the local host for 4200, and API runs on the 5001. So the browser will block the request unless the API allows the request from the local host 200 of local host 4200 via CORS. How ASP.NET Core handles a course? So an ASP.NET Core provides a built-in middleware to handle the course. So register the course in a program.cs file or startup.cs file, where builder is equal to web. This one in the, okay. Apply the policy, add policy, and allow with the any headers, and allow any method. So with origin specifies which domain can access your API, allow any headers, allows the custom headers, and allow any method allows the get, post, and put and delete. You can also use allow credentials if you want to send cookies or authentication and tokens. So ASP.NET Core uses a built-in in course is handled by in ASP.NET Core uses the built-in middleware to handle the course and configure it in a program.cs using the add course method to define the policy and apply the policy in a use course middleware. For example, in my project, the front end is runs on the localhost to 4200, and my API runs on the localhost 5001. So I added a course policy allowing a request from the that origin with all the methods and headers. Thumb rule. Add course is the configuration, and use course is a middleware execution during the request pipeline. Authentication. So we use the JWT, and in my project we use JWT OAuth to OpenID Connect. When a user logs in the client application, it will redirect to the Azure Active Directory identity provider. The user authenticates there, and the identity provider issues an ID token, and ID token for identity, and access token for the API authorization. And the client sends the access token in the authorization barrier header, we attached automatically using an HTTP interceptor, and the API validates the JWT signature and issue audience. and expiry, and then enforces the authorization using the roles and scopes and policy checks. In my project, we use the JWT, OAuth2, and OpenID Connect. When you use the logs into the client application, it will redirect to the Azure identity provider, which is an Azure Active Directory identity provider. Then user authenticates there, and the Azure Active Directory identity provider issues a, yeah, ID token for identity and an access token for API authorization. The client sends the access token to the authorization barrier to authorize API validates the JWT and signature issues and expiry, and then enforces the authorization uses the roles, scopes, or policies checks. What is the difference between OAuth 2 versus OpenID Connect and OpenID Connect? OAuth 2 is an authorization framework. OAuth 2 is an authorization framework. OpenID Connect is an authorization layer built on the top of OAuth 2. OAuth 2 is an authorization framework that allows application to securely access resources on behalf of a user without sharing their credentials. OAuth 2 is an authorization framework that allows the applications to securely access the resources on behalf of a user without sharing their credentials. For example, when you log into a third-party application using the Azure or Google like that, so OAuth 2 ensures that the app can access your data, like your email address, with your permissions without knowing your password. OpenID Connect is an authentication layer built on the top of the OAuth 2, while OAuth 2 deals with the authorization, what the app can access. OpenID Connect deals with the authentication, who the user is. It provides an ID token containing the user identity information such as name, email, and profile details. In simple terms, OAuth 2 is authorized access to the resources, and OpenID Connect authenticates the user's identity. When you click on a sign in with a Google and gives the app permission access your Google account data, OpenID Connect confirms the who you are and returns your user information like email and name. What is the difference between cluster and non-cluster indexes? Cluster index determines the physical order of rows in a table. A table can have only one cluster index. A cluster index is automatically created on the primary key. Cluster index is faster for range queries and order by and the primary key lookups. Example for the creating is create for the cluster index. Create cluster index name on employee and employee ID, table and column name. And non-cluster index creates a separate structure from a table. It stores a sorted copy of indexed column and a pointer to the actual actual data rows in a table. It stores a sorted copy of indexed columns and a pointer to the actual data rows in a table. So a table can have multiple non-cluster indexes, scenarios like searching by non-primary key columns like last name and email and status. Store procedures versus functions. Store procedure may or may not return a value. Store procedure can have select statement as well as DML statements such as insert, update, delete, and so on. And the store procedure can have both input and output parameters, for example, handling For exception handling, we can use the try catch blocks, and we can use temporary tables and temporary variables and common table expressions, and we can use transaction within the stored procedures, and stored procedure can call the functions, and function must return a value. Function will allow only select statements, and it will not allow us to DML statements. It will allow only the input parameter, and it does not support the output parameter. It will not allow us to use try and catch blocks, and we can use only table variables. We cannot use temporary variables inside the functions, and store procedure cannot be called from function, and function can be called from a select statement. Difference between the tables and temp variables and common table expression CTEs. So temporary tables are created at runtime, and they are physically stored in the temporary temp DB under the system databases. Temp tables are created at runtime. Temp tables are created at runtime, and they are physically stored in the temp DB under the system databases. Temporary tables are generated. Temporary created tables. Temp tables are created at runtime, and they are physically stored in a temp DB under the system databases. Temp tables are similar to the normal tables. They also have constraint keys and indexes, and etc. We can perform all the operations in a temp table like in a normal table. Temp tables are similar to the normal tables, and they also have the constraint keys and indexes. We can perform all the operations in a temp table like in a normal table. SQL Server provides two types of temporary tables. One is a local temporary table and global temporary table. Local temporary tables, which are session scope, and local temporary local temporary tables are only available to the current session that created them, and the local temp tables are automatically deleted when the session is closed, and the local temp tables or name is started with a single hash, and global temp tables which are visible across all the sessions until explicitly dropped all the users are disconnected, and the global temporary temp tables name is started with the double hash. And the temp variables also temporary variables, and table variables. Temp variables also called table variables. Temp variables also called table variables. Temp variables is similar to the temp table to use holding the data temporarily. Temp variable is similar to the temp table to hold the data temporarily. The scope of temp variables is limited to the current batch and the current store procedure only, and the temp variable de- deleted deleted automatically when the batch or procedure completes, and the temp variable is named start with the at the rate, and temp variables are created using the declare statement. Temp variable is started with the at the rate, and temp variable are created using the declare statement. Declare at the rate, name anything, and like that. CTE is used to common table expression. CTE is used to hold the temporary named result set or results of complex subquery. CTE is used to hold the temporary named result set or results of common subquery. It is like a temporary result set that you can define within the execution scope of a single select, insert, update, or delete statement. It is like a temporary result set that you can define within the execution scope of a single select and insert and update or delete statement declared with the with keyword, declared with the with keyword, not stored in a temp table, temp db, just part of the execution plan, exist only for single query, cannot have indexes, and the scope of temp CTEs is limited to the current query only, expire after the execution. CTEs allows update and delete operations directly when used to filter the target rows, while insert into the CTE is not allowed. There are two types of common table expressions are there. One is a non-recursive CTE and recursive CTE. When a CTE has a reference in itself, when it's a called recursive CTE. So with the CTE name and column 1 and column 2, and as your query is here, select column 1 and column 2 from table, and where condition, select from CTE name where say some condition. What are the joins in SQL? In SQL, joins are used to combine data from two or more multiple tables. Let me quick explain. Inner join only matching rows, and a left join all the rows and plus matching right, and or right join all the right rows and plus matching left, and full outer join all the rows from the both tables with the null if no match. Cross join all combinations, it is a quotation product. And self join a table with itself and multiple keys, join or okay. So inner join only matching the rows from the A and B table. Left join all the rows from the left row or left table and plus matching rows from the right table. And similar thing is happened with the right join all the right uh, table rows and matching rows from the left. So full outer join is all the matching rows from the both the table and with the nulls if there is a no match. For example, in a table, id is not there, and in a b table id is not there, id is there. So in a table id is there, but b table id is not there. So wherever it is null, then it shows the null. Cross join is all combinations of quotation product. Difference between the union and union all. The main difference is here that union removes the unique duplicate rows from the result set, and union all does not remove the duplicates from the result set. Removes duplicates from the result set, and does not removes the results from the result set. Union combines the result sets of two or more select queries. Union combines the results of two or more select queries into a single result set. Union removes the duplicate rows from the result set, and each statement must have the same number of columns, and column must have the same data type. So, same number of columns with the same data types. So, union all combines a result set of uh, more, more two or more select queries into a single result set. And union all does not remove the duplicate rows from the result set, and each select statement must have the same number of columns, and column must the same data type. Example of select statement 1, union 2, union 3. You can see here. What is the difference between where and having? Where clause cannot contain the aggregate functions. Where clause cannot contain the aggregate functions. Having clause can contain the aggregate functions. Where clause does not contain the aggregate functions, and having clause can contain the aggregate function. Where clause is used to filter the rows before the grouping is performed. Where class is grouping the filter the rows. Where class is used to filter the rows before grouping is performed. Having clause is used to filter the rows after the grouping is performed. Having clause is used to filter the rows after the grouping is performed. Group by class is used after the where class, and group by class is used for after the where class, and group by class is used before the having class. Group by class is used to before having class. Where clause is used with the single row function like upper that's just one, and having clause used to multiple row function like sum and count. Explain the transactions in a SQL server. Transactions in a SQL server. A transaction is a single unit of work that consists of one or more SQL operations. A transaction is a single unit of work that consists of one or more SQL operations: insert, update, delete, that must be executed completely or not. SQL SQL server supports SQL server support transaction, begin transaction, and commit and rollback. Begin transaction, commit and rollback. Begin transaction, commit and rollback. A transaction mean a transaction means doing a group of operations as a one unit. A transaction means doing a group of operation as a one unit. Either all succeeded means committed, or all fail means rollback. Example: if you transfer money from account A to B, both debited and credited must be happen together. Otherwise, rollback. What is the begin tran and commit and rollback? Begin transaction starts a new transaction. It A transaction means a group of SQL operations that must succeed or fail, and if transaction success, then move to the commit. If fails, move to the rollback. Commit saves all the changes made in the transactions permanently, and cancel the all the changes made in the transaction. Rollback cancel the all the changes made in the transaction. We can use built-in SQL Server features like at the rate error for errors. If at the rate error is zero, and commit to catch any runtime error during the transaction. Modern and best way to use try catch. Begin try, begin tran, commit, end try, and begin catch, rollback, end catch. Begin try, begin tran, commit, end try, begin catch, rollback, end catch. Okay, scenario. User wants to book a seat for an event. Many users may try to book the same seat at the same time. We must ensure to no two users get the same seat. In a ticket booking system, multiple users may try to book the same seat at the same time. To handle this, I wrap the booking logic in a transaction. First, I check if the seat is free and then update it as a reserved or sold, and commit. If another transaction is already holding the lock, SQL Server may raise the deadlock error. In that case, I'll roll back and retry the operation. I also keep transactions short, use optimistic concurrency, row version, or pessimistic locks so that no two user can book the same seat. If two users trying to update the same role in the employee, if two users are trying to update the same role in a employee table at the same time, I'll wrap the updates in a transaction. If SQL Server detects a deadlock, it will pick one transaction as a victim and throw an error. And in my code, I'll catch that error and roll back the one transaction and retry the update. And to reduce the deadlocks, I also keep transactions short and make sure proper indexing existing on the role column. If query is running slow, what step you will take to improve the performance? Query optimization techniques. So using proper indexing and use union all instead of union, and instead of using select star, use specific columns, and also when use exist instead of count, and avoid using not equal to or ankle brackets in the subquery. Use like operator wisely, and distinct request sorting and extra processing. So I use it when only really needed. Use only necessary joins to avoid extra joins unnecessarily. They can slow down the performance. How do you optimize slow running queries? Proper indexing, avoid select star and prefer joins over the subqueries, and utilize CTEs and temp tables, and analyze the execution plans exist instead of in, and keep transactions short. What is the store procedure and how will you optimize the store procedures? So a store procedure is a block of precompiled SQL statements stored in the database which can be executed by calling its name instead of writing the full SQL code every time. What is a group by? In SQL, you use it to group the rows based on the one or more columns, often with the aggregation function count, sum, average, min, max. What is a link queue? Link queue stands for Language Integrated Query. It is a feature in a .NET that allows to query the collections and database XML and etc. Providers like SQL, like syntax, or write queries directly in a C Sharp or VB.NET, retrieve and manipulate. It promotes the readability and type safety. Why LinkU is useful in .NET? Why LinkU is useful? Because supports a compile time and intelligence checking, and reduce the need for the different query languages, and simplifies the querying across various data sources, and promotes a clean and readable code, and reduce the need for the boilerplate loops. Yeah. Coming to the C sharp. Coming to the C sharp. Can we define the same method in a two interfaces and implement them in a single class? If not, how do we resolve the conflict? Yes, we can. Yes, we can define the same method into the two interfaces and implement them explicit by using the interface name in a single class in a C sharp. So, for example, it's have an interface I first and interface I second, and having the same methods as a display, and I have derived. I have implemented the interfaces into the my class, and I void I first dot display and void I second dot display. So first explicit for the explicitly call the interface, and then what is a method overloading and method overhiding? Method hiding. Method over. What is a method overloading and method hiding? So method overloading means having the multiple methods with the same name but different parameters. uh, means having the multiple methods with the same name but different parameters. And method hiding means the derived class defines the method with the same name and same signature as the base class method. As comparison of the method overloading, we marked the base class method as a virtual and derived class method as an override to re-implementation of the method. In this case of method hiding, we have to use a new keyword in a derived class method. We can use or not. If not, warning will come. Yeah.